Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. A few people have asked me to do a video giving my thoughts on all the Ravenloft novels. I say all, most of. I've not read all of them, but I've read most of them. Those that are readily available through things like Kindle or Audible, but also a few others beyond that. In addition to having not read them all, a couple of disclaimers, one of which is I read some of them a while ago, a couple of years ago. The most recent ones I read were probably only a few months ago. But yeah, I remember most stuff, but bear with me. I might get some details wrong or mixed up or whatever. And expect spoilers. I'm going to be talking about characters, plot points, favourite bits in the books. There's going to be spoilers. If there's a book you haven't read yet, you don't want it spoiled, maybe skip that one. The series of books was, or at least originally, when they first came out, it was called Ravenloft the Covenant. I'm going to run through them in that order, which I think it's that order based on information I found on Amazon, Goodreads and Wikipedia. And then there's one or two beyond that that aren't part of that series but came out later. In addition to help from places like Wikipedia, I'm also using help from Mistopedia. And there was also a handy article about all the Ravenloft novels on a website called Dungeons and Dragons Fan. I got a feeling I've talked about them before. And I'll include a link to that article in the description. So big thanks to those two sources for helping with this video. Let's get to it with the very first one, Vampire of the Mists by Christy Golden. Oh, by the way, before I carry on, I've got notes on this screen, the Dungeons & Dragons Fan and Mistopedia stuff on this screen, so you might see my eyes going back and forth. Vampire of the Mists by Christy Golden. Have I read it? Yes. This is the novel about Jander Sunstar, who falls in love with a woman named Anna, and she dies. He gets transported to the domains of Dread, specifically Barovia. He meets our good friend Strahd von Zarovich, and two vampires, the good vampire and the evil vampire, have an uneasy alliance at first, and then Jander confronts and tries to defeat Strahd. I love this because I love Jander. Jander was the first Ravenloft NPC video I put out. It's great insight for Strahd beyond the Strahd novels, which we'll come to later. Unbiased, because I'll talk about this later when I talk about the Strahd novels. The Strahd novels are essentially his journals, his diaries. And so, you know, it's his perspective. In this, he's not the main character or protagonist. It's good to get that sort of feeling of what he's like without being potentially biased. And it's great to see a rivalry between two vampires as well. I added Jander to my game, but played that the events of Vampire of the Mists were true centuries earlier. So everything had happened and he got to Barovia, confronted Strahd. I think in the novel he dies at the end, he walks into the sunlight, but if you're doing Curse of Strahd 5th edition, Barovia, there is no sunlight to walk into. But I think they changed it in Van Richten's guide anyway, saying that after his battle with Strahd he was misted away somewhere else, which is what I went with. So he was in Barovia, got out of Barovia, wandered the domains of Dread. The cloning stuff, I talk about that in the video and it's talked about in Van Richten's guide, sort of happened as well, which not really come up in my game yet. But the point I'm trying to say is it was quite cool. He recognised the holy symbol of Ravenkind. He was able to tell them that he'd met and fought Strahd earlier and could talk to them about it. He told Viktor Valakovich they knew his ancestor Sasha Petrovich. It was all good stuff. Another thing I loved in the novel as well was the twist where Strahd's werewolf lover was also under a different name, the girlfriend to Sasha, and then it's revealed near the climax. I thought that was great. You couldn't do that in a TV show or a movie because you'd be like, hey, that's the same person. But in a book, it made them out like they were two different people, and it's only later on where it's revealed, and I was like, that was really clever, really good. Knight of the Black Rose by James Lauder. Have I read it? Yes. This is the first of the two Lord Soth novels. Lord Soth is originally from Dragonlance, and still is in Dragonlance, but apparently had a little brief foray into Ravenloft. And this is basically, he gets teleported into Barovia, much like Jander, and tries to get out with the help of a Vistana, his Sessional, I think it has to be pronounced, who's a ghost, and a Werebadger as well. So Lord Soth is a great villain, loved Death Knights, loved seeing him in Barovia and Castle Ravenloft, and I think there's a brief bit where he's in Vallaki as well, which I don't think appears. Village of Barovia obviously appears in some of the books, but I don't think Vallaki appears in any of the other books, so it's quite cool to see what Vallaki's like in the books. Like Azrael Dak, he was the Werebadger, Magda, who's the Vistana woman, they were great characters as well. And I remember a brutal bit, I'm pretty sure it was this novel, not Vampire of the Mists, where in order to annoy Strahd, Soth kills everyone in the dungeon, and It's a bit of a funny one because it's almost like mercy killing them, because they were like suffering down there and they probably would have died at some point. But I just remember reading it and being like, oof, that's rough. But yeah, that moment stuck with me. I briefly remember someone saying as well that he punches a red dragon woman to death as well, which is pretty rad. Next is Dance of the Dead, another one by Christy Golden. Have I read it? Yes. This is about Larissa Snowmain in Suronia. I always thought it was pronounced Sorange, but apparently it's Suronia, so apologies in past videos if I've said that wrong. Probably in the Larissa Snowmain video, dedicated video I did, I said that wrong. And I like how it started off in Darkon as well. So on the ship she's on, it goes from Darkon to Suronia, and she learns druidic powers, and then she learns necromancy powers, and she has to fight her sort of adoptive father, who's the captain of the ship that she later inherits. Captain Raoul Dumont was a great villain, a pretty horrible dude. I remember there was a character called Dragon Eyes as well, who's pretty cool. I like Dragon Eyes. And I remember as well, one thing that stuck with me was the brutality of the final fight. You've got it's not just Larissa, she's got a few allies, and she frees some people / mythical creatures, if memory serves, on the ship. And so, not everyone makes it out alive. Some of them are killed, and I remember it being pretty brutal that some of them, they basically fight for their freedom, and, you know, fighting for their freedom and dying is still better than what they had, and some of them obviously survive as well. Heart of Midnight by J. Robert King. This is the first one I haven't read. It's not available readily on places like Kindle or audiobook. I understand this set in Cartacus. There's a character called Casimir who sets out to get revenge against the man who murdered his mother, and Halcyon Lucas, the Darklord of Cartacus, gets involved as well. I'm possibly running Cartacus soon, so I'll try and read that before I do, because obviously I like to sort of absorb anything. If I'm about to run a domain, absorb anything about that domain, whether it be a novel, a resource, an old adventure, I will gobble it all up. Next is Tapestry of Dark Souls by Elaine Bergstrom. Have I read it? Yes. This is about an order of monks who have to guard a evil tapestry that has, like, I think, a necromancer inside, and it like can absorb people. And this is the story of the son of the necromancer, I'm probably getting this all wrong, who has to basically fight and work with the monks and fight and destroy the tapestry. One of the brothers of the Order of the Guardians is called Brother Dominic. I've actually incorporated him into my game, because on Misterpedia it said that he spent some time in Hazlan, and my players are in Hazlan at the moment, so I've introduced him as an NPC, and he's travelling with them as well. So he can heal them if needed, although they've printed 2 out of 3 of the characters got healing spells. But there's the whole thing in 5th edition Hazlan where it's like wild magic surge can happen if you cast spells, so that's been an interesting twist on things. I love the format of this book. So it starts off in first person, about the first third of the book. The character's called Leith. She's an outsider, an outlander, if you will, somebody who's not from the Domains of Dread originally, I don't think. And during the course of the event, she becomes a werewolf, and she, I think, finds Tapestry, gets sucked in, is pregnant, and dies after having given birth or something like that. And then the latter 2/3 of the book are in the third person, following the protagonist, Jonathan, who is Leith's son. And I liked it. I thought it was a bit weird at first, it being first person, but it's kind of cool. It was kind of like her diary, her confession. It worked really well when it then switches to the third person. And one of my favourite parts of the book, of any of the Ravenloft books, there's a really brutal bit where one of the brothers, I want to say Brother Leo, goes to try and meet with Jonathan in secret. And there's a whole build-up of a chapter's worth where it talks about how he sneaks away and he's going through this cavern and he sees these bats, I think it was. And basically page after page after page of him trying to sneak away. And then he finally sees Jonathan, and Jonathan murders him. I think Jonathan, even the protagonist, I think there's some evil in him and there's some stuff he can't control. Or maybe the sort of tapestry has an influence over him. And literally in the space of 2 sentences, it just says, after these pages of build-up, it just says that Brother Leo's dead. And I remember reading it and being like, whoa. And it was incredible. It was well at the point where you kind of like have to reread it and say, did that just happen? That was so fast and just so quick and so brutal. It was incredible. Great writing. Next up is Carnival of Fear, another one by J. Robert King, and another one I haven't read. And I'm sad that I haven't read this one because it's a novel about the Carnival. The Carnival was one of the first domains I ran after Curse of Strahd and Barovia. And I included Hermos, who in 5th edition is called Hermos the Half-Giant, but I don't think he's called Hermos the Half-Giant in pre-5th edition lore. People can correct me if I'm wrong. So I would be keen to read it at some point because I've run the Carnival multiple times. It's kind of a place they go to. They've been back and forth 3, maybe 4 times now over the years I've been running this campaign. And so I can imagine it would be a good sort of resource for Hermos. And other Carnival acts and characters as well. Maybe some that don't even appear in 5th edition. I like the idea that maybe the next time they go to the Carnival, there's new troopers there, new Carnival acts. And so I can borrow from that and other sources. Oh, here we go. Heir of Strahd, Memoirs of a Vampire by P.N. Elrod. Have I read it? Of course I have. It was the first Ravenloft book I read. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Paul Bamer. Speaking of the which, I'd heard some people say they must have heard like a different version and they didn't like Paul Bamer, but I like Paul Bamer. I thought it worked well. Maybe it's that thing of the first one you hear is the one you cling to, right? So I bet if I heard the other narrator, I wouldn't be as fussed. But whatever, I like Paul Bamer. I thought he did a good job. This is essentially the Tome of Strahd from Curse of Strahd expanded out to the story of Strahd arriving into the Valley of Barovia and settling down, and Sergei comes and meeting Tatiana, and then the wedding day. And then there's also stuff beyond that isn't in 5th edition, such as Strahd finding Leo de Lisnia and stuff like that. He was the traitor, the assassin, the guard / assassin who tried to stage a coup on the wedding day, which is when Strahd made his pact. I consider it a recommended reading for a Curse of Strahd campaign, or a campaign that includes Strahd of Barovia, I guess. As I mentioned earlier with Vampire of the Mists, the Heir of Strahd novels are, because they're his diaries, his journals, he's a biased narrator. And also one thing to watch out for as well is there's differences to 5th edition. So in 5th edition, Strahd has a chamberlain called Rahadin, who's Dusk Elf, who obviously doesn't appear in the novel because he's a creation of 5th edition. And then you have characters like Alec Gwillem, who doesn't appear in 5th edition. There is a character called Godfrey Gwillem, who I think is a nod to Alec, and so he's not in it either. And then how Strahd makes his pact is different, because in the 5th edition version he does it at the Amber Temple, but in this version I think it just kind of happens and Alec's the sacrificing all to start it. Next up is The Enemy Within, another one by Christy Golden. Have I read it? Yes. This is one that's set in Nova Vasa and follows the story of Sir Tristan Hyregard, who has a sort of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing going on, where sometimes he's Tristan Hyregard and sometimes he's Malcolm. Malcolm being super evil. I got this initially, not because I wanted to read it in full, but because I had to run a Vistani trial in my Curse of Strahd game. Long story short, Van Richten, who disguised as Rictavio, got discovered having a tiger that hunted Vistani. My players didn't like this, so they took him to the Vistani for a trial. And I remember asking on Reddit, hey, how do I run a Vistani trial? And someone pointed me in the direction of this novel where there's briefly a Vistani trial as well, which is great. I really liked this novel. It was really good. It got me interested in running Nova Vasa, which I haven't run yet. I don't still plan to, but it certainly got me interested in wanting to run the domain. I really liked the story and the characters. And even though Sir Tristan Hyregard is gender swapped in Van Richten's guide to Maya Hyregard, I'd probably use Tristan because of this novel. Although that said, could cause confusion with Tristan at Blank from Forlorn, which I have run, 2 Tristans. Plus, I do like the idea of a Jekyll-Hyde situation where it's a woman instead of a man, so I might backtrack on everything I just said in the last 20 seconds, and if I were to run Nova Vasa, maybe run it with Maya Hyregard anyway. But this novel's great reading if you are running Nova Vasa. Mordenheim by Chet Williams. I've not read this one. This is set in Nemours. It's about Dr. Victor Mordenheim trying to revive his dead wife. I've heard it's good, and I imagine it would be required reading if you are doing Nemours. I haven't run Nemours. I did do a video about Nemours. I haven't run it, but if I were to run it, I would read this. Tales of Ravenloft, edited by Brian Thompson, because it's a compilation of short stories. I've not read it, but would absolutely love to, because there's some great stories in there. Some of the writers are people who've written full Ravenloft novels, such as Jean Deweese, assuming that's how it's pronounced, James Lauder, Elaine Bergstrom, P.N. Elrod, and lots of the mains and Darklords are covered. I remember, I think one of the stories is about Ulrich von Kharkov of Valachan fame, and I ran Valachan once, so that could have and should have been required reading, I imagine, before running Ulrich. Tower of Doom by Mark Anthony. I've not read this one. I understand that this one's primarily set in Darkon and may or may not feature Azalin Rex. It's about a hunchback who is a sort of Hunchback Notre Dame retelling with a Ravenloft twist. That's what Dungeons and Dragons fan is telling me. Well, I'm hoping to run Darklord at some point in the future. Is going to be where the end game happens in my campaign, so I'll try and read it before that all happens. Baroness of Blood by Elaine Bergstrom. Not read this one. The same author of Tapestry of Dark Souls. This one is set in a domain called Kislova. It's a new one for me. I don't think it's part of 5th edition. I don't think it's in the 5th edition list of major or minor domains. And as far as I understand as well, there is no adventures or other resources tied to this. I think this novel is the only place that kind of covers it. It's about I'm reading off the D&D fan website, when a brutal invasion leads to the death of the Baron, his young daughter, Elizabeth, sets out to gain revenge, turning to the dark art to fulfill a quest. Sounds good. Death of a Darklord by Laurel K. Hamilton. I've read this one. So this is another one in Cartacus with Harkon Lucas, and concerns the story of two twins, one of whom becomes a magic user, and Harkon Lucas has a scheme as well where he tries to escape the domain. Interestingly, I'd heard from various people that this was not a good Ravenloft novel, but I really enjoyed it. But I will confess that I nearly gave up on it. I think I was about 20% of the way through and was considering giving up on it. I'm not someone who gives up on books lightly. So, and I was going to say later, there were 1 or 2 Ravenloft books I didn't read in full. I'm sorry. I'm a bad Ravenloft fan. But I can't remember what the catalyst was for making me commit with it, but I ended up reading it all. But I will confess that I wasn't too sure of it to begin with. I did like how it was a group of adventurers who find and team up with another group of adventurers. That felt sort of very traditional D&D, which you don't get with a lot of the Ravenloft novels, but you do with newer D&D books such as Heir of Strahd and the Fallbacks. I also liked Elaine's deal. I got a feeling I talked about her in another video. She's sort of a sorcerer whose father hates magic and used to hunt magic casters. She's later mentored by a wizard, which is obviously a complication with what her father's feelings on magic. And when she tries to heal people, it backfires, and I kind of picture it as instead of healing hit points, it does necrotic damage, that kind of thing. So she's a very interesting character with very interesting abilities. And of course, it's got Harkon Lucas in it, who's great, in my opinion. As I mentioned earlier, I might be running a Cartacus soon. It's a good flavour for that. If you're thinking of running a Cartacus, it's worth reading. Scholar of Decay by Tanya Huff. I've read this one. This is set in Rishamelo, and it follows 2 brothers, one of whom is a wizard, who visit the domain. And while the older brother, the wizard, has his own quest and mission, which I'll talk about in a minute, the younger brother kind of becomes friends with the Renier family. And one of the Reniers, Louise, tries to use them to try and overthrow her sister, Jacqueline Renier, who is the Darklord, both in Old and 5th edition. I love the Newcomb brothers as characters. This is probably one of my favourite novels, to be honest with you, out of the whole lot. The Newcomb brothers were great. Auric with the spells, he'd describe how the spells cast, and I'd be like, hey, that's Burning Hands, and hey, that's Fireball, and possibly Featherfall, and a few others as well. And Auric's mission was to save his wife, who's trapped in a statue. I think it was something like a spell that went wrong, and so he's trying to find the cure for that. I got a feeling he's trying to find his spell book, which he thinks is somewhere in the domain, and has the spell to reverse the damage. I'm not usually a fan of political scheming in TV shows and movies and books. And there's obviously a lot going on with the Reniers all trying to you've got Louise Renier trying to overthrow Jacqueline, and it feels all very political. But what I think made it fun was it's so petty and so bickery between the various Renier family and cousins and their personalities and their attitudes to it all. It just made it a lot of fun. King of the Dead by Jean Deweese. I've read this one. This is set in Darkon and is the story of Faran Zalhonan, who goes to fight the Lich Darkless Rex. And spoiler alert, I saw this in spoiler tags on the Ravenloft subreddit once, so I don't know if it's that serious a spoiler, but I will warn, spoiler alert, the 2 of them together are Azalin Rex. And the 5th edition version of Ravenloft, Van Richten's Guide, doesn't necessarily say this, but it kind of hints that Faran is... It kind of talks about it in Van Richten's Guide about how Faran and Darkless are the 2 halves of Azalin, and Azalin was split in 2. Faran's a very important part of my campaign because my players have met Faran. They're about to meet him a second time in Hazdalan. And the end game is going to be Faran confronting Darkless with the players, and then the 2 of them becoming Azalin. And Azalin is going to be the BBEG of this arc of the campaign. If you are running something similar or you're running Darkon, it's pretty good reading. I did a video, as mentioned, all about Vran if you want to learn more. To Sleep with Evil by Andrea Cardarell. I've read this one, and this is set in a different domain. I can't remember which domain it is. Oh, this is telling me it's set in Darkon. I don't think it was set in Darkon, because the Darklord, I thought it was a dude with his own domain. Anyway, the Darklord, the baddie, is called Lord Donsky. It's about a woman called Marguerite who becomes his wife and has a baby, but things go wrong and he's not a very nice dude. And I think the pregnancy is weird and, you know, the baby's corrupted or something like that. It's been a while since I read it. It's an unusual one. I'd probably say I don't hate it because I'm a writer myself. I hate hating on other people's books and stories, but it was probably one of my least favourite of the lot. I did manage to read it to the end, despite, you know, saying that there's some I haven't read in full. But one of the standout moments in the novel is the character Jacqueline Montari, who is a sort of headless woman who goes around stealing heads, and there's a great scene that Marguerite witnesses where they rescue some people in the mists and Jacqueline basically kills them and steals their heads. It's great. So it does have its good moments, I think. Lord of the Necropolis by Jean Deweese. I've not read this one, although it is essentially the sequel to King of the Dead. This one, again, talking about Azalin trying to find a way out of Darkon, classic Azalin. However, I did read a note on Mrpedia that said, trivia, this novel explains the nature of the dark powers of Ravenloft. This is why the novel is often considered uncanon by the fans. So that's interesting. So I think I almost want to read it to see what it says about the dark powers, but I'm guessing it's either the case that people don't like the dark powers being explained, or it explained them in a way that wasn't very satisfying. If you've read the book, please jump into the comments and let me know. I'm assuming it's one of those two things. Either way, I think if, you know, I'm hoping to read it because it'd probably be good inspiration for Darkon, for Azalin, and so on. I'll try and read that before I run Darkon. Shadowborn by Carrie A. Bebris and William W. Connors. I've read this one. This is set in the Shadowlands, or Shadowlands cluster, specifically in Avonlea, where the paladin, Alexei Shadowborn, has to confront Ebonbane, the demon in a sword that killed his mother, Kateri. I heard people say it was okay before I read it, and that other Ravenloft novels are better. It's quite linear, so I can kind of understand that, but I still enjoyed it. I'm hoping to run the Shadowlands soon after Aslan, and I'm going to have one of my players is a paladin / warlock. He's a descendant of the Shadowborn family. So Alexei, Farron, Aurora, Kateri, that's his ancestors. So I'm looking forward to running it, and I've got a few ideas for how it's going to play out. And I found some great stat blocks for ghouls in armor and with weapons, which I think is perfect. So I'll include that, and I'll do a video about that someday. But to go back to the novel, if you're thinking of running the Shadowlands, I think it's important and good read to see what Alexei is like, to see, Ebonbane, he just over the top, like, foolish mortals, how dare you try and contain me and summon me and contain me in this sword. Great flavour for Ebonbane. Heir of Strahd, The War Against Azalin, the Heir of Strahd sequel by P.N. Elrod. Yes, I've read it, listening to the audiobook by Paul Bamer. Narrated by Paul Bamer, sorry. This is the story of how Azalin gets sucked into the Domains of Dread, ends up in Barovia, meets Strahd. The two of them are frenemies. A very uneasy alliance where they both realise they both want to escape the domain and both work together. And Azalin can help Strahd learn magic better, but Strahd gets frustrated, wondering why can't Azalin cast the spells himself? You know, and it's because Azalin can't learn new spells or what have you. And I just think it's great. The rivalry, the pettiness between the two of them. But again, biased narrator, has Strahd made himself look good and made Azalin look bad because it's Strahd's journal. Also, there's a character called Tu Yusup, one of, I think, Azalin's generals, or maybe Strahd's, but I think it's Azalin's, who I was like, that's a really unusual name. And then someone told me on Reddit, when I was talking about it, someone commented saying, yeah, it was a whole thing with it was kind of like a screw you from the author to the publishers. I won't say any more other than read it backwards. Yeah. I really like the prologue and epilogue of this book as well, with Van Richten in Mordant. I actually incorporated Mrs. Hayward and Milos into my game. Mrs. Hayward's the bookshop owner, and Milos is the person who comes in with Heir of Strahd 2, the second journal I think he's the servant working for a burgomaster was executed by Strahd, and then he escapes Barovia and ends up in Morden and tries to sell the book. But yeah, so they had brief cameos in my game, and I just thought the prologue and epilogue, and seeing more Van Richten is always a pleasure as well, seeing what he's like. Spectre of the Black Rose by James Lauder and Veronica Whitney Robinson. Have I read it? Yes. Ish. Sort of. Full confession time, this is one of the 2 books I started reading and gave up on. I know all the Lord Soth fans are gasping, and I'm sorry. I am an awful person. I got a feeling what happened was I read it straight after Night of the Black Rose, and I think it was just too much of the same too soon. And I think I got like 20-30% of the way through, and I was like, I'm not feeling this anymore. And I think there was another book I wanted to read, and so I pivoted away. But I've just finished reading the Dragonlance novels, the original trilogy, and spoilers, Lord Soth appears in the 3rd one, and I wasn't expecting it. So when I was reading it and saying, yeah, I was reading it being like, this guy sounds familiar, and then it's described to me Lord Soth. I was like, oh my gosh, Lord Soth in Dragonlance, wee. Yeah, it's made me think maybe I'll give that another try. So I'm going to reread Spectre of the Black Rose and see if I can get through it and get to the end. And I've learned as well that the 2 books, Night of the Black Rose and Spectre of the Black Rose, are collectively referred to as Terror of Lord Soth. I didn't know that. Today I learned. Heaven's Bones by Samantha Henderson. Have I read it? Yes. Ish. Unfortunately, this is another one I gave up on. I think the reason I gave up on this one is because it's Gothic Earth, and you hear about Vistani. I think it starts off in Cartacus, but then there's a Vistana who is met in London, and I think there's mentions in Paris and Rome. And I don't know, it just... Maybe people have different feelings about this, but as soon as like real world places are included, it's kind of cool because it makes you think, hey, imagine if the Vistani visited our world. You know, technically they can travel the multiverse or travel domains of dread or whatever. That's quite cool. But I don't know, just as soon as you hear places like London mentioned, it kind of takes me out of the book and doesn't feel like fantasy anymore. It's a bit weird. So I gave up on that one as well. I might give it another try in the future, we'll see. Mithras Court by David A. Page. I've not read this one, and funnily enough, I only discovered this one a few weeks ago. Can't remember how or why, but I was reading something and I was like, oh, that's a Ravenloft novel. I didn't realise it was, and didn't realise it was part of the series. This is another one that I think is set in London, though, so I don't know, based on what I just said a minute ago, if I will read it or if it will just be weird. But I don't know. I've heard good things, and maybe I should give it a try. Black Crusade by Ari Marmel. Not read this one. I understand that the author also did a short story called Before I Wake, which I've also not read, and that both, or at least this full novel, Black Crusade, was actually available for free online once upon a time on the Wizard of the Coast website, but I don't think the link works anymore. It's another one set in our world. There's talk of it being about the Crusades in Jerusalem, so again, I think I'd be a bit like, that's weird, but again, maybe that's just me. And that's pretty much the Ravenloft the Covenant order done. Beyond that, there were some comics, including Strahd appearing in something called Shadows of the Vampire, and the Lemordia-focused Orphan of Agony Isle, which I talked about in my Lemordia video. And then the only other novel beyond that that's related to Strahd and related to Ravenloft is Heir of Strahd by Delilah S. Dawson. Now, have I read this? Yes, of course I have. Multiple times, including the audiobook. And this is, for those not familiar with it, maybe read all the old Ravenloft novels, but you've not read this new one that came out in May earlier this year, 2025. It's about a group of adventurers from different parts of the Sword Coast, sucked into Ravenloft, sucked into Barovia, and eventually get an invite to Strahd's castle. And I won't tell you much more, but that's essentially sort of back of the book blurb and what saying enough without giving away too much. I did a grand total of 4 videos about this novel, because originally I did a video with my thoughts and predictions when it was first announced. I did 2 review videos. One is spoiler light, where I kind of just give a sort of very high-level overview of what I thought about it without giving away spoilers or too many spoilers. And then a spoiler-filled version where I properly geeked out and talked about the book in full. Don't watch that version if you haven't watched it. I got some feedback from somebody who watched that and said they struggled to keep up with it, but I think they hadn't read the novel and watched the wrong video. And because I was just off on one rambling, being like, yes, and this character appears, and they go to this place, and blah, 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 blah. And then I also did a 4th video where I talk about things you can use from Heir of Strahd and put in Curse of Strahd as well, which seemed to do pretty well and seemed to be quite popular. So if you haven't watched those, I'll include links in the description if I remember, or you can dig them out on my channel elsewhere. Hopefully that was all of them. Hopefully I've not missed any. If I've missed any, please let me know. What should I read next? Ravenloft or otherwise? I like reading the D&D books. I know they're not the... Some people say that, you know, there's probably better fantasy books out there, but I like reading them for inspiration for Ravenloft and D&D in general. I should probably read some more Forgotten Realms ones. I might carry on reading the Dragonlance books, especially any that have Lord Soth. What should I read next? Please let me know. Thanks again to Mrpedia and Dungeons & Dragons fan website for the synopsis list. I'll include a link to that in the description. And that's it for this one. I'm going to be really cheeky here. On the subject of novels, I've written 2 epic fantasy novels. The Demons series, Demons 1, The Birth of Magic, Demons 2, The Fear of Magic, come out in the last year or so. Third on the way, if I ever get around to finally finishing writing it. If any time I spend writing it is time not spent making videos. And the videos are going well at the moment, so I want to keep making videos. But they're not really Ravenlofty. I'm not a horror writer. I'm more of an epic fantasy writer. I'd say they're more like Forgotten Realms, Honor Among Thieves in their kind of style. But there are probably a few horror-y moments in there, so feel free to check them out. Or if you'd like sort of not just horror stuff in Ravenloft, but like sort of broader fantasy, D&D inspired fantasy, please do give it a try. The first one, if memory serves, is only 99 cents, 99p, 99 pence in euros, US dollars, pounds at the moment. So nice, easy, cheap book to pick up and give a try. And if anyone from Wizards of the Coast is watching this and you're looking for more people to write more Ravenloft novels after Delilah S. Dawson's Heir of Strahd, hi, my name is Steve and I'm a writer who's not only a big D&D fan but a big Ravenloft fan. Please give me a Janda Sunstar to write about officially. I would love that. And I know you've got people like Delilah S. Dawson, who's a New York Times best-selling author, and I'm just some sort of newbie loser writer who's self-published, but hey, you know, what a way to sell it to you. But if you want a Ravenloft novel by someone who's a huge fan of Ravenloft, then hi, I'm here. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Miss Wanderers.